This is Ashley Newby, and you're listening to the Black Studies Podcast, a Mellon Grant sponsored series of conversations examining the history of the field. Our conversations engage with a wide range of activists and scholars, senior figures in the field, late doctoral students, cultural workers, political organizers, and everyone in between in order to explore the cultural and political meaning of Black studies as an area of inquiry and its critical methods. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Black Studies Podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Marion Orr, inaugural Frederick Lippitt Professor of Public Policy and Professor of Political Science and Urban Studies at Brown University. How are you doing today, Dr. Orr?
Oh, I'm doing well. I'm doing great. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to talk to you both about Black Studies, but also about your new book. So we can go in. It's a Friday, so I don't want to take too much of your time. So the first question I have for you is, how did you get into doing work that focuses on Black studies? Like you do a lot of work with African American political science. How did you come to that as a focus of study?
Well, I'm a graduate of Savannah State University, which is a historically Black college down in my hometown, Savannah, Georgia. And I did my undergraduate work in political science at Savannah State. And the person who taught me political science and who became my mentor and close friend was a man named Haynes Walton Jr. Haynes, like the t-shirt maker, Hanes. And his last name was Walton. Haynes Walton was a political science professor, Ashley, and he literally helped create, was a major architect of the subfield of Black politics in American politics. So my professor at Savannah State, Haynes Walton, was a major architect of building the field of what we now call Black politics. So I've got an early start, deep immersion into the study of Black Americans and their politics in particular while at Savannah State. I went on to get a master's degree at Atlanta University, now called Clark Atlanta University, another historically Black college. And there again, I studied under some of the top Black political scientists in the country, all of whom focus much of their research largely on the experience of Black Americans in the political process. So I started this very many years ago, and have since been interested in Black politics and certainly Black studies in that regard.
What keeps you committed to doing this particular type of work? You have several books that look at Black politics. So there are many different options for topics, obviously. What keeps you committed to centering stories and research about the Black community?
Yeah, there's so much there that has not been studied. There's just a lot of the history and the politics of Black Americans have not really come to the fore. So that there's so much out there that still need to be researched, and I'm often finding new avenues of research that aligns with my interest in Black politics. We have. Let's take history, for example. There's this sort of narrow focus in history, for example, on particular Black leaders, and there are lots of African American leaders whom, for example, have been sort of overlooked. So my interest in this is that there's so much about us, so much about our experience, and we have a unique experience. That is, Black Americans have a unique experience in this country that distinguishes itself from almost every other a group in this country. So there's so much there to research and study. And I'm always encouraging my students with this interest to say that there's lots of new research, new data that we should plow into and examine.
So speaking of that, your latest book on Charles Diggs, The House of Diggs, that definitely looks into somebody who is not one of the main names that come up all the time. Do you want to say a little bit about what drew you to writing about this particular congressman?
Oh, sure. And it goes back to what you asked earlier about me, my early interest in Black politics and Black studies. I learned about Congressman Charles C. Diggs Jr. when I was an undergraduate student at Savannah State, when I was around 17, 18 years old. Professor Walton taught many of the courses at Savannah State. And when Professor Walton would teach, let's say, a course on urban politics, Diggs would come up in that course because Walton would teach us that Washington, D.C. was different from any other cities in that it's a special district.
Mhm.
And he would teach us, and he taught us that Charles Diggs was the father of home rule for Washington, D.C., a unique city that Charles Diggs played a big role in empowering Black Americans. When Professor Walton would teach a course on American government, he would teach about the Supreme Court, the presidency, and he would go into the Congress. And whenever he talked about Congress, he had to mention that Charles Diggs was the founder of the Congressional Black Caucus. And then finally, Ashley, when Professor Walton taught a course on African politics, Diggs came up in that course because Diggs was a major player in the American anti-apartheid movement. So I learned about Charles Diggs at Savannah State. I went on to get my graduate degrees in political science, and I learned still more about him, and then discovered that no one had written a book on this guy. And so I decided some 11 years ago to take the plunge and to write what is the first biography of Charles Diggs Jr., who was the first Black Congress member from the state of Michigan.
So there's a lot of interesting things about Congressman Diggs, and you mentioned some of them, right? Like founding the Congressional Black Caucus and just being the first Black congressman from Michigan, which has its own thing because of Michigan's political past and history and the role that Detroit played in terms of manufacturing and all of that in this country. But one of the things that is interesting, or one of the things I found interesting, right, was that he was the only federal official that went to Emmett Till's funeral.
Yes,
Um,
his trial.
yeah, the trial. I apologize.
Trial. Yeah.
So what do you think that role played in how he continued to do his job?
Oh, wow. I'm so glad you asked that question, Ashley, because you're right. Diggs was, in fact, the only federal official to attend the trial of the two white men who were accused of murdering Emmett Till. Emmett Till, as I'm sure your listeners and others know, was the 14-year-old Black boy from Chicago who visited his family members in Mississippi in the summer of 1955, and he was murdered and lynched by these two white men. The white men were acquitted by the jury, by the way, an all-white jury, but they would later admit to having killed Emmett Till. Diggs decided to go down to Mississippi and observe the trial. Diggs had just gotten elected in January of 1955. He had just become a Congress member. And in the summer of 55, he goes down to Sumner, Mississippi, and he sat in the courtroom there for 5 days observing the trial. And my book explains the impact Diggs had while he was there those 5 days. Let me add, Ashley, that Diggs wrote about his 5 days down there for the Pittsburgh Courier, one of the premier Black newspapers of the time. So you can actually read his account of his experience, which I did and which I put some of that in the book. And so what I want to say is Diggs had a major impact in three ways while he was there. Number one, he had a major impact on the witnesses, the Black witnesses that came forward. Many of them were afraid initially to testify because in 1955, a Black person testifying against a white man really risked their lives.
Mhm.
And so several witnesses were afraid to come forward, but they did come forward. And later on, after the trial, these Black witnesses told their family members, relatives, and the reporters that they were comforted and given strength by seeing Congressman Diggs in the courtroom, that the presence of the Black Congress member gave them the courage and the strength they needed to come forth and to testify in the courtroom at the trial. So he had a major impact on the witnesses that came forward. The other impact that Congressman Diggs had on the trial of the two white men who killed Emmett Till was that his presence there brought additional media attention to the trial, and it brought additional attention to what was happening to Black Americans throughout the South in the 1950s. Diggs, as I said, was a newly elected Congress member. He was a Black Congress member. In fact, he was one of only 3 Black Congress members at the time. So his presence there drew additional media attention who the reporters were curious about this new Black Congress member. And finally, the third thing about the Emmett Till trial that I want you all, your listeners, to know about was that Diggs was sending a signal to America when he went down there in 1955. He was sending a signal to America that although he was elected from the 13th District of Michigan, that he planned to be a congressman for all of Black America. So he was sending a signal there that he planned, and his intentions were clear early on as a new member of Congress, that I'm going to speak out and stand up for Black Americans all around the country. And early in his career in Congress, actually, he would go down to Alabama, Mississippi, and other hot spots in the civil rights movement to support the courageous Black men and women who were fighting for freedom in the South.
Thank you. So I'm curious. Obviously, there's not necessarily a real answer for this question, but I am curious as to why do you think that Charles Diggs is not more well known, considering some of the things that he did, and the lasting impact of just founding the Congressional Black Caucus, like that's a huge thing to this day. Why do you think his name is not mentioned as much as some of the other well-known congressional leadership, Black congressional leadership?
I've been asked this question a lot, and I'm not certain I have a really good response for it. I'll say a couple of things. Number one, I believe that Congressman Diggs, and he served in Congress from 1955 to 1980. For a good part of that period of time, he served with Adam Clayton Powell, who was a Black Congress member from New York, from Harlem.
Mhm.
Powell arrived in Congress 10 years before Diggs in 1945. And Powell was a minister by training. He led at a very prominent Black church, the Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem. And Powell was a militant Black leader. He was a publicity seeker. He was flamboyant. He was handsome. And the media, and let me just add the white journalist who makes accounts of what happens in Congress, really was attractive to Powell because he was, a good person to cover because he spoke out against racism and he, was always there for the media. So I argue, Ashley, to your question about Diggs being forgotten, I believe he was overshadowed by Adam Clayton Powell. And the other thing that I think impact the fact that he's somewhat forgotten is that at the end of Charles Diggs' career, he had a tremendous downfall. Diggs would actually be indicted, convicted, and imprisoned for violating Congress's payroll regulations. And I do believe that Diggs' downfall may have had a real impact on his being forgotten, that people may have shied away from him because of what happened to him in the end. I'll say this, you can do a lot of great things in your life as a person, as an individual. And if you do one thing really bad, oftentimes it's that one bad thing that you did, that we did, that people remember. Brian Stevenson, the attorney, who wrote the book, what's the book called? You know what book I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Brian Stevenson, he wrote this book, and he said that we all should not be remembered by our worst moments.
Yeah.
You know? So I think those are the things that impact the fact he's forgotten. That he was, and me add that Diggs was, unlike Powell, Congressman Powell, Diggs was quiet. He was somewhat unassuming. And he also worked really hard. So he was very busy. So he was overshadowed by Powell. And I think his indictment, conviction, and imprisonment really hurt his prominence.
Thank you. So, building on that and thinking about what it means to do Black politics, right? How do you situate yourself in relationship to the multiple disciplines that your work is crossing?
Mm-hmm. Well, let me say, I came to political science with a strong interest in the politics of Black people, Black Americans, my people, if you will. And I was able to do that early on in my career through the study of urban politics and cities. And so a good part of my research and part of my publications and my research record focus on Black Americans and their politics in America's big cities.
Mm-hmm.
And when you are studying cities in particular, urban politics in particular, you really have to interface yourself not only with the political science literature, but you have to read the history literature. You also have to read the research on urban America that is done by the sociologists. So I find myself over the years actually reading lots of work by the historians and also reading lots of work by sociologists, people like William Julius Wilson, the great sociologist at Harvard. You see, those kind of sociological, Elijah Anderson's work, uh, the ethnographer down at Yale. All of these folk have done really substantial work on the urban environment. And if I'm going to try to situate African American politics within this urban environment, I need to know the history. I need to know the sociology. And so I found myself over my long career often interfacing with literature outside of my discipline of political science.
Thank you. That really, it reminds me, a lot of the scholars that we've been able to talk to for the podcast have talked about how the questions really drive like the methods that it takes to get to finding answers. And so oftentimes when you are committed to focusing your work on Black people, and Black ways of knowing and understanding, it's not necessarily about the disciplinary methods that you might have been initially trained in so much as it is what are the strategies and methods that are necessary to actually answer this question in a way that maintains and acknowledges the humanity and knowledge of Black populations.
Yeah,
So
this is very true. I should tell you, I just published this biography actually of Congressman Charles Diggs, and I argue, and I think I support this quite well in the book, that Diggs was perhaps the most consequential Black person ever to serve in the Congress. But let me tell you something: political scientists typically don't do biographies. And so I have done something, really that goes somewhat beyond what I had been trained to do. Typically, historians and or journalists are the ones who write biographies. And so I found myself, if I wanted to learn about this wonderful Black Congress member, I had to go to the archives. And political scientists do not do a lot of archival work. So I found myself spending lots of hours doing archival work, doing data gathering that's not typically found in my discipline of political science.
thank you for that. It definitely, I guess it just hadn't occurred to me that like in political science, you wouldn't necessarily do a lot of archival work.
No, if we're going to study a congressperson, know what we're going to do as political scientists? We go and we get roll call data, and we would take a look at Congressman Diggs' roll call vote for 25 years, and that's how, and we would, somehow measure, what he voted on, and probably run a regression model and lay out, here's how this congressman behaved. We tend to be more interested in that kind of behavior, and so yes, political scientists typically would not have approached Congress the way I approach it in this biography of Charles Diggs Jr.
So that actually makes me curious as to whether or not you think that being a political scientist allowed you to approach the putting together of a biography of somebody who doesn't have or did not have one about them in a different way.
Yeah. Well, I'll say this: I've gotten some really good reviews from about the book, and a couple of people have, in fact, noticed that I was able to bring a political lens to Diggs' life and work in Congress that a historian or a journalist may not have a focus on or may not have fully captured. Because as a political scientist, I understand, the give and take of coalition building, for example. I
Mhm.
understand that Diggs have to, if he's going to get something done through Congress, how the committee system work and how you have to make compromises and make certain that you get a bill that the president's going to sign. So a lot of people, well, a number of people who have read the book have recognized that I bring a sort of different lens, if you will, to Diggs's life in Congress than a historian or a journalist might have, given my training as a political scientist. And taught, I'm trained, although I focus on cities, my training is American government. So I've took lots of courses on Congress and the presidency, and I'm able to bring that to bear in writing this biography.
Thank you. Building on that, I wanted to ask how your work as an instructor, and a teacher scholar, how is that informed by both your commitment to Black politics and understanding Black politics, but also to doing what it takes to get the answers to the questions? Like, I would imagine that your um, willingness to engage across disciplines in order to be able to do this type of research also plays out in your classrooms. And I'm just curious as to what that might look like.
Yeah. Well, I teach courses that are aligned with my research interests, so that the two, the teaching and the research, really ebbs and flows well together.
Mhm.
Next semester, for example, I'll be teaching my African American politics course, where I spend a good bit of my time over the years talking about African Americans and their role in the Congress. And now I'll be able to give my students a clearer example of the role of Black leadership, for example, in the Congress. So for me, the two, the teaching and the research, have always gone hand in hand, strengthening each other. I could try out some of my ideas about Diggs with my classroom students, and I could get their feedback, and I can go back and think about their feedback, and then begin to write with some more clarity about what I want to say about Congressman Diggs. Because I wrote this biography, I wrote this biography to appeal to a broad audience. And if I can't get through with my undergraduate students here at, so for me, teaching and research have always gone hand in hand, and they strengthen each other.
Thank you. So, you've kind of touched on this a little bit, but I wanted to ask, what interests you most about the past of maybe Black politics?
Yeah. I have found myself in the last decade or more, probably longer, being especially interested in political biography. Um, it's again something we don't do much of in political science, but I've become really drawn to what we can learn uh, from political biographies. In a way, it's like a case study that we may look at in political science. So that for me to spend, 10 years and to write over 300 pages about this one Black American leader allows allows me to dig really deep into the experience of black leadership, how it's formed, how it's
Mhm.
develop, how it's maintained and sustained. Uh, so yes, it's this for me was a very different approach to learning, to research, and to disseminating, if you will, my findings. Because what I wanted to do in this book is to write this book in a way that it'll be readable and approachable for as many people as possible. Yeah.
So, last question, building on that. Um, so what interests or excites you most about the future? of Black studies and Black politics in particular, or you can take this question to be, where do you think the field should go next?
Yeah. I'll say this, there is a growing recognition of the legitimacy, if you will, of studying the experience of Black Americans. This was not always the case. When my professor, Haynes Walton Jr., started off back in the 1960s writing about the Black experience, this was really not a part of the broader American political science discipline. And what we've seen actually over the decades is a growing recognition in many of the disciplines, sociology, histories, and others, of the great significance of the Black experience and what the Black experience brings to the understanding of America writ large. I see that in political science and other disciplines, and I see a growing group and cohorts of academic scholars who are coming into disciplines and they are boldly saying that they want to study the experience of Black Americans. They're not making any bones about it. This is what they want to do, and I see this in my graduate students, not only in political science, but I've encountered graduate students in history, sociology, and other fields who are really, really committed to broadening our understanding of these disciplines by bringing in the experience, the unique experience, and often the case of Black Americans. So I'm hopeful, just given the growing interest that I see in young people who are being pulled into and gravitating toward this Black studies and Black politics and what have you.
Thank you. Uh, I think that you're right in that there is a growing interest in understanding the experiences of Black people in this country and what that has looked like over time and the implications for the history to the present. Um, I think we're in for a very interesting immediate present, but that research will continue in whatever form it happens. So thank you for that. Was there anything else you would like to add before I give you back the rest of your Friday afternoon?
Well, I just want to encourage your listeners to go out and take a look at the book House of Diggs. It's a book that I spent some time on, but I'm getting really good feedback from it. And I think your listeners, if they have an interest in Black political leadership, interest in the civil rights movement, interest in Africa, because Diggs was a big proponent of Africa. Any of those subject matters, you ought to pick up a copy of House of Diggs, read it, and tell others about it. You can check me out on marionorr.com.
Okay. Well, thank you so much again for being here and for writing this biography so that more information can be known about Congressman Diggs.
Ashley, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.